Welcome to the Grail Standard. I'm your host, Sir Yvain. Welcome to the first episode of the Grail Standard. So this podcast is going to be all about finding chivalry amidst the confusion of the world. And I thought I would start today's episode with why I have chosen Sir Yvain as the knight of, I suppose, for my handle. The reason is that Sir Yvain is all about justice and compassion, right? And I thought that this would be really good with today's episode, the first episode of many, hopefully. I wanted to talk about compassion and justice, but I wanted to talk about compassion. Now, if we look at Sir Yvain, the knight with the lion, what he symbolizes in the romances, he champions the wronged, restores order in lawless places, and repeatedly shows mercy. His alliance with the rescued lion is a classic emblem of justice tempered by compassion. And I thought that this was very important. The reason I'm bringing this up is I noticed that very recently there was a man by the name of Charlie Kirk who was gunned down at a university rally. And I don't like it when especially when people are engaging in speech, I don't like it when anyone is shot. But the thing that I found really surprising was the lack of compassion that a certain segment of the society had in relation to this. Politics aside, from what I've seen of him, the only thing that I could say that I saw that I don't know if it's out of context was that Charlie Kirk made jokes about... I saw a small video clip of Charlie Kirk making jokes about George Floyd's shooting. Now, I don't know the context of that joke. If it was an actual joke, then I would say that's not something that should be glorified. But I don't want to talk ill of the dead. But I was watching the discourse on Twitter in relation to this, and it was very surprising how tribalized societies have become. At the end of the day, like the way that he was killed, he was shot in the neck in front of his children. And I'm not advocating violence against politicians, but he wasn't a politician. He was just a guy who used to go speak at universities. And what was very interesting was the discourse on Twitter that I saw. There were some who were laughing about it, and then there were some who were obviously incredibly angry. There was a person who was on CNN, I think it was, that tried to say that Charlie Kirk brought it on himself by saying hateful words lead to hateful actions. But I think one of the things that I sort of noticed is this loss of compassion. Is that I don't know if this is a new phenomenon, and I don't think it is, but this loss of compassion for people on the other side of the political divide, right? I am a frequent critic of the left, but not because I don't see that the right doesn't have things to criticize. But the problem is that, like, the left seems to have this idea that... if you're fighting against... They label everyone that they disagree with fascist, even though they don't understand what the term means. They call everyone a Nazi, even though they don't understand what the term Nazi means. But this is dangerous because... why is it so dangerous to call your political opposition fascist? The reason is that when I went to ChatGPT and I asked ChatGPT, what are the 3 steps of spreading propaganda? What are the 3 steps, right? And what I found was that what there wasn't like 3 exact steps involved, but there were some patterns that were confirmed. And the first pattern was to dehumanize your political opposition, right? And the word, when you label somebody that you disagree with, one, I don't think the word fascist should be used in the context that it's used today. Most of the people who use the word fascist don't even know what the word means. Even the word, those who call people Nazis often don't understand that the word Nazi is an acronym for National Socialist. But the reason that I bring this up is the dehumanizing of people is the very first stage of spreading propaganda, is to dehumanize people, right? And so there were three steps that there were three main steps that were observed. The first one was to dehumanize or demonize the enemy, to portray them as subhuman, monstrous, or uniquely dangerous to lower empathy and raise hostility. The second step was to justify harm, moral disengagement, reframe aggression as self-defense or a moral duty, use euphemisms, victim blaming, and a higher cause rhetoric to make the abuse feel acceptable, and then to normalize and silence dissent is the third step. Repeat the message relentlessly and create social pressure so opposing so opposing views feel risky or taboo. The spirals of silence. Now, if you actually look amongst the left, you're starting to see it amongst the right, especially with Charlie Kirk shooting. But you see these tactics used on the left, right? When they label everyone as fascists they disagree with, they know exactly what they're doing. They really do understand exactly what it is that they're doing. They are dehumanizing their political opponents on purpose. If you go to Google and you search for the poisonous mushroom, you will find a series of comics that were drawn in Nazi Germany about Jews that did the same thing, right? They dehumanized Jews, right? And so when you call someone that you disagree with a fascist or a Nazi, you are, whether or not the people who came up with this, they are spreading propaganda. This is exactly what they're doing. They are dehumanizing their political opponents, which is exactly why Charlie Kirk was shot. It's very clear now that his opponent, that the person who shot him, was convinced that he was a fascist, and that's why he shot him. Even though the left has tried to hide this. But what was really shocking to me was the lack of compassion, right? About, like, people on the left, like many, like Hassan Piker, Destiny, all these people claiming that he deserved it, right? And I'm not going to say that I watched Charlie Kirk much, because I didn't. I don't really tend to watch shows about humiliating leftists, because I see it as, like, especially like the people that they tend to have on, these are people who are just they are confused, or the people who tend to debate him that have very extreme opinions about what they believe, they tend, in my opinion, they are mentally ill, a lot of them, right? I'm not talking about in terms of their sex, but I'm just talking about in the way that they view the world and the way that they look at the world. It's very clear that the left, don't get me wrong, I see it amongst the right as well, but it's become much more propagandized on the left. So it's really interesting when you see people like Bill Maher. I wouldn't say that Bill Maher is what you call a 90s liberal, right? They are completely different from the SJWs, right? The 90s liberals were not calling for banning freedom of speech or anything like that, but the modern day ones are. But that's sort of a side tangent. The point that I'm getting at is that what I really found disturbing was the lack of compassion. And I'm not just going to say that I see this on the left. I do see it on the right. I have seen, a while ago, there was this Democrat, I think in the House of Senate or something like that, who people were, and she had colored hair, and people made a meme comparing her to a monster from an 80s show. And I just thought that was out of character. You know what I mean? I personally don't believe that jokes about a person, like, it's one thing if a comedian does it, and while I do advocate for freedom of speech, I just thought that making comparisons about someone's looks, I don't think it looks good, personally. It's one thing to attack and to critique ideas, but I personally try to stay away from attacking people, right? I think it's more important to attack ideas than to attack people. And I also think that it's important to understand that even when you have someone that you disagree with on a political level, they are still a person. You have to remember that. And I think that's one thing that I've noticed in the discourse that, I've seen from both sides. It's worse from the left, but I've seen it on both sides, where the discourse is gone and people are saying horrible, nasty things about each other. And I just, like, as much as I like freedom of speech, and I'm not saying that these people shouldn't have the right to say it, but in my opinion, it's just a bad look. In my opinion, Charlie Kirk might not have been the most perfect human being, but people should have still had compassion for the fact that he died in front of his family. I mean, he was a speaker. That's all he used to do. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. It's unbelievable to think that violence against someone who's just speaking is justified. I like the idea of debating people, or, or at least having a civil discourse. And what this shooting of Charlie Kirk has done is that it's completely changed the narrative, where you can get shot now just for being a public speaker. So I have to be honest, I knew that this was coming. You can't go around calling people fascists and Nazis without even if the people who were calling him that didn't do it themselves, there's always a small percentage of the population that is mentally ill and that will take what those people say and go and do it. So even if those people didn't pull the trigger themselves, they did effectively pull the trigger by radicalizing a person on the fringe of society into doing something. It's very clear that that person believed that Charlie Kirk was a fascist based on what they found on shells. So to say that the leftist rhetoric didn't have anything to do with it is just problematic, and it's a lie. Will things change? I'm going to do another episode about the history of communism, but I don't think that this was accidental, in the sense that I think that the left intended for something like this to happen. I think that's why the people come up with, they call people Nazis. I think that's why they do it. It was, even before this, there are groups like Antifa who call themselves anti-fascist, but who go around using violence to silence their opposition. Just like Hitler did, by the way, just like the Nazi Party did. They also had, I think they were called brown shirts, who would go around silencing their opposition. So it's funny that they call themselves anti-fascist, but they're actually a fascist institution. They're aligned with BLM, which is an anti-Semitic organization, or at least when I last checked into them. They have a member of staff, a member on their, back in the day when I used to look into them, they had a member on their panel in the organization called Linda Sasso, who is an open anti-Semite. She claims that the reason that her anti-Semitism is okay is because Jews were the first slave traders in Europe, and that is true. But the other thing that she fails to point out, or maybe she does know, is that even after the slave trade was abolished in Europe and America, it still continued in the Middle East. So I don't know how she fits that into her view, but she does. So since that organization has her in it, and Tamika Mallory, who was asked on The View, Tamika Mallory is the head of BLM, she was asked on The View, would she denounce Louis Farrakhan when he said the Jews are evil? She wouldn't do that. So that is at least it was at the time, if she's still the head, that was an anti-Semitic organization who masked themselves as a progressive organization. That's sort of a side note, but it just sort of points out that I don't think that this is, when they use this rhetoric, I think that these are, the people who are directing this are professional propagandists. My point is that you do need to have compassion for those, and you have to remember that even those people that you disagree with politically, they are human beings. Human beings are fallible, and as someone who believes in Christianity, I personally believe that forgiveness comes from believing that we're all flawed, right? So understand that when you're dealing with someone who is on the opposite end of the political spectrum, understand that that's still a human being. They still bleed like everybody else does. So I just thought I would do this podcast on this. This is the first episode of the Grail Standard. Thank you please like and subscribe if you haven't already done so. I will see you on the next one.